Hello, and welcome to video 5 of the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT My EdSpace series. Today we're going to be looking at a kind of free text question that appears often on the exams, the logical reasoning and evaluation questions. I'm Eleanor, I'm one of the English teachers at My EdSpace, and I will be talking you through how to prepare for this section of the exam and how to tackle specific kinds of questions. So if you've seen any of my other videos on this section, then you'll know that there are two types of questions on this section of the exam: free text questions and true, false, can't tell question sets. Both of these are based on the contents of a 250 to 400 word passage or the conclusions or inferences that can be drawn from it without outside information. So you don't need to have read any specific books or know about any specific historical events in order to answer these questions. The expectation is that all of the information you need to find the right answer is given to you in the passage itself. The setup of each question is the same on this computer-based exam. The left-hand side of the screen is your passage, and the right-hand side of the screen is your question. There are 11 question sets, so 44 questions in total, 22 minutes for each, for all of the questions in total, and only 28.6 seconds per question. So there is not a lot of time to complete this section, which means we have to use our time really wisely in how we tackle these questions. Free text questions are usually 7 to 9 of the 4 question sets. So that's 28 to 36 free text questions in the exam. This varies year to year depending on the year, because the examiners don't want the exam to become too similar year to year, and to thus have people expect what will be on it in terms of the breakdown of the types of questions. They will be asking you to complete a statement with the logical or most correct ending phrase, or answering a question from a set of 4 full answers. They will also be asking you to make a value judgment based on the information you're given in the passage and what you can logically conclude from this information. So I've made 2 other videos on inference and deduction and information retrieval questions. This is the third type of free text question that we encounter on this exam: logical reasoning and evaluation. And these are the types of questions that evaluate arguments or assess how statements support or weaken a claim. So it requires you to evaluate the information you have and then determine the relationship between the statements you're given or the questions you're given and the passage and the information that you can logically conclude from the passage. So it's asking you to evaluate and to see the relationship between pieces of information, which is necessary when you're thinking about a career in medicine, and the relationship between seemingly diverse or seemingly linked pieces of information. You might also be asked how effective something is based on the presentation in the passage. This does not require your personal opinion. In fact, sometimes the examiners choose topics that you may have a really strong personal opinion on, or a lot of outside knowledge about, but that is somewhat part of the pitfall, because they want you to only rely on the information in the passage and not make any personal judgments. It's important to keep your own opinions out of your decision making here. You'll also need to judge the efficacy or strength or relative weakness of a piece of information by its stated and measurable results. That's important, that last part there. Not how strong or weak you think it is, but based on the information that you're given, which is presented as the strongest or weakest piece of information. These are what the types of this type of question looks like. So, which of the following statements, if true, would strengthen the argument? If the passage is true, what else could be true? What is not true? What would weaken the argument based on the information in the passage? What statement best supports it? Which of the following statement is best supported by the passage? The strongest arguments for or against something, or the most or least likely to support something. Notice a couple of things here is that it says best supported, or if the passage is true. So first of all, we have to take the information in the passage as true when we're answering those questions, even if, again, it's not correct in our minds or sort of quite vague in its attention to detail. We need to, in those questions, accept that the passage is true, and then based on the reasoning and line of argument in the passage, what would appear true or be true to the author. The same for the which of the following would weaken the argument or best support it, or would be the most or least likely. This is again based not on your personal opinion of the topic, but on out of the 4 pieces of information you're given, so the 4 answers you have to choose from, which is the best based on the passage. Again, this might not be the ideal choice, or it might not be the best answer in the real world. It might not be entirely clear or entirely fully nuanced or complete as an answer. So all you have to do is remember the limitations of this question, which is that you have to eliminate the answers you know do not serve you, and work out which out of these 4, if these are the only 4 options available, serves this passage best. Some common pitfalls for this question, because it's quite a value judgment type of question in which you have to rely on conclusions and you have to evaluate. It's important that you are using those reading and scanning skills to scan the passage for keywords and ensure that across the passage, the opinion or the presentation of the topic is not changing. So that's your first mitigation and contradiction. When there are keywords in the passage, which I have discussed in a previous video, keywords and the reading strategies for the passage, one part of the passage may appear to contradict the other. So it's important that though you're not reading the full passage, you're just scanning it for the information in the 28 seconds you have for each of these questions, that you make sure you scan the entire thing and you take in the scope of the whole passage in that very limited amount of time as best you can, because it is very common that the keywords are split up on purpose, or that an idea is introduced in an earlier paragraph and then later is contradicted or changed in some way. And usually that is done entirely on purpose to guide people wrong if they're not mindful of this scope and mindful of the fact that key details might be included multiple times in the passage with different meaning, and thus direct you towards different answers. Same, I've said it a lot in my other videos as well, correlation is not causation. You need to look for bridging phrases. So often when we're reading sentence to sentence, our mind establishes links between the pieces of information that we are reading. That is not the case with these passages. Oftentimes there are 2 sentences put together that you might, in the real world, be able to draw conclusions that one is related to the other, or one is caused by the other, or one is the effect of another. But that's not true in the world of verbal reasoning sections in the UCAT. You need to look for bridging phrases like however, consequently, as a result, or due to, that point you to the fact that one of these sentences is related to the other. If not, they may just be next to each other, and the level of detail that is the difference in both actually allows for a grey area, which means you're being guided to a wrong answer rather than a certainly correct answer. You don't want to make assumptions that you can't support based on the information in the passage. So there may be logical conclusions that you might be able to make in the real world again about the information you're being presented, but you need to be mindful of the very careful language in this section that may guide you towards making assumptions that, if you look back at the passage, cannot be 100% confirmed by the passage itself, in which case you're being guided towards the wrong answer. Juxtaposition is another idea very linked to mitigation and contradiction, or correlation is not causation, in which pieces of information are stood next to each other, however they are in contrast or in tension in some way, and though it's our logical conclusion to assume that those ideas are linked, they are not necessarily, so be mindful of that. There are also sometimes gaps in information that require conclusions. So you may be listed several reasons why an event took place, and then you might be asked to make a conclusion about what was the strongest factor towards the event taking place based on the information surrounding that in the passage. So they may not give you word for word the answer that you're looking for. So you need to be mindful that some of the phrasing is difficult and that you might be needing to make a conclusion about the efficacy in particular of a piece of information or of an event or topic and its influence over another element of the passage. You also need to consider value judgment. So, as I was just saying, you need to make the decisions and inferences based on the information presented to you. So, you need to operate your logic within the world, as I said, of the verbal reasoning section and only conclude pieces of information based on what their value is in this context. Again, you need to avoid using or relying on outside information as it's often there to distract you and not to help you out. So let's look at a couple of examples of a logical reasoning or evaluation free text question set. And we're going to model the type of answer and reading strategy that I want you to use when you are taking the exam or preparing on your own. So first we're going to read the question itself. Which of the following statements is best supported by the passage? This is question 1 here. Printing eliminated errors in book productions. Monasteries went into decline as a result of the printing press. Printing immediately caused the Protestant Reformation, and printing made books cheaper and more widely available. Okay, so a couple of things I'm noticing here in this phrasing are some of the definitive language that we studied in a previous video. Definitive words being words that limit information because they limit the possibilities. So eliminated means that there were no more errors in book production as a result. It's quite a specific and harsh word. So if there are any errors in book production in the world of the printing press, then we need to be mindful that this answer will be immediately incorrect because it's saying there are none. Monasteries went into a decline as the result of the popularity of the printing press. Here, as a result, stands out to me because we want to think about, is this a causal phrase in that these two ideas are linked, cause and effect, or is this an indication that there might be a juxtaposition happening here, or a correlation is not causation here, in which monasteries went into decline and the popularity of the printing press occurred, but possibly not one as a result of another. The third option, printing immediately caused the Protestant Reformation, here immediately stands out to me because, again, it's a definitive word, so that means it would be very specific in terms of the information we'd be noticing in the passage if it said it immediately caused it. If it's not immediately and definitively caused the Protestant Reformation, or if there is a gap in time between or other factors at play, that might be in question. Same with the word caused. Again, it might be that printing and the Protestant Reformation happened around the same time, but are not necessarily linked in a causal relationship. And then D, printing made books cheaper and more widely available. So here we're thinking of the effect of printing on their accessibility to the populace. So as we're scanning, we don't have keywords in the question itself, but we have keywords in the 4 different answers. So as we're scanning, we're looking at, for example, the first paragraph when we're seeing that the printing press revolutionized book production before this manuscripts. We can see the process, this meant that books were rare and expensive initially, and we're noticing monasteries, one of our keywords from the answers is here in this first paragraph. Printing press allowed multiple identical copies to be produced quickly, and here is some information here, not a keyword but a synonym for a keyword with available and accessibility, and the same with reducing costs and cheaper. So though they are synonyms for the words in the passage, they're not the exact same words. Okay, so this leads us to thinking that monasteries were involved with book production before the printing press, so there might be a causal relationship here if later the printing press made things cheaper and more widely available. D sounds like a pretty good answer so far, because we have that idea that Gutenberg's press allowed that to happen, and it seems pretty cause and effect, that the printing press dramatically reduced costs and increasing accessibility. But let's keep going. Earliest printed books. Okay, we're looking at the kinds of books here. We're looking at, and I see here the next big keyword, capital letters. Very helpful for a keyword so it stands out to you. And let's look around this keyword to see the information itself. The rapid dissemination of new ideas helped fuel the Renaissance and later the Protestant Reformation. Now, some words that stand out in this sentence here: helped, fuel, and later. So this doesn't quite look like a synonym for immediately caused, does it? Helped fuel suggests that there were lots of other factors in play to start the Protestant Reformation, and also the later suggests that that the answer to do with immediately, answer C, is not going to serve us. So I think we can be pretty confident in crossing that one out. And let's keep reading. And I can't see any other key words there other than this worry about the quality of books. But that's not about the accessibility. Here we see access, but it's again fears and worries and not facts. So if we look back at our answers, we can see that the monasteries used to make books, but we can't really see how they affected the monasteries later. So we cannot for a fact conclude that the monasteries went into decline as a result. That may have had to do with related topics mentioned in the passage, like the Protestant Reformation, but we certainly cannot conclude that based on the information we have. Same with printing eliminated errors in book production. We can see here the idea of errors here that are worries, but not necessarily facts. So we cannot say that printing eliminated errors. We know that people worried about the errors in the printed books, so that is also not our answer, leaving us with answer D. Same passage, but a different question. Which of the following, if true, okay, so we're seeing that phrasing that suggests that this is the logical reasoning question again. Which of the following, if true, would weaken the claim that printing always increased accuracy? Okay, so if we're thinking about weakening this claim that printing always increased accuracy, we're looking for places where printing actually decreased accuracy. Let's take a look. Scribes in monasteries often made small mistakes when copying texts. Well, if the manuscripts, which were so much more painstakingly copied by hand, could make mistakes, then surely that would not help, or that would not weaken a claim that printing always increased accuracy if it may have avoided some of the handmade mistakes. So that sounds wrong. Most early printers trained as apprentices. Can't see very much about, I can't see the key word apprenticeship. I can see, however, poorly trained printers here, poorly trained printers, that would introduce errors, but that has nothing to do with why they might decrease accuracy just because they're apprentices. Indeed, it might be that they increase accuracy because they've been trained well. So we can definitely not conclude that that would weaken the claim that printing always increased accuracy. Printing errors caused by the machine spread through large print runs. Okay, so we have printing errors caused by the machine. So that seems like a printing issue that the monasteries would not have. And then spread through large print runs. So that seems like that would affect a lot of copies of the books and thus be a bigger problem than a small error made by a monk in a monastery handwriting. That would not immediately affect large print runs that would cause widespread errors. So this seems like a pretty good answer to us. It seems logical and would weaken the claim that printing always increased accuracy if some of the machines made errors that meant that lots of copies of the book were then inaccurate. And then printing presses could produce identical copies of a text. This may be true. As we can see here, identical copies of a text. That would not weaken the claim that printing always increased accuracy, because if the original was correct, then that would mean that the identical copies would also be correct. It also means if it was incorrect, they could produce identical copies of an incorrect piece of information, but that we don't know which is which means that it could support the claim that printing always increased accuracy, or it could weaken it. So we can't say for sure that that would weaken the claim that printing always caused increased accuracy. So we are left to conclude question C as our answer. Printing errors caused by the machine spread through large print runs would certainly weaken the claim that printing increased accuracy. Question 3, which of the following was not, again, so we're looking for some type of way of negating, not an effect of early printing. So we're looking for cause and relationship ideas here, and ones that were mentioned in the passage. So we're looking for places where these ideas are mentioned. So a spread of Renaissance ideas, that seems like a good keyword that we'll find easily in the passage. A challenge to institutional authority, that again seems like it'll be easy to find. A decrease in costs of book productions. I know we've seen costs before, now that we've scanned through the passage several times. And then the spread of socially disruptive ideas. I definitely remember that phrase from the fears at the bottom. So let's take a look back at this. So the spread of Renaissance ideas. The rapid dissemination of new ideas helped fuel the Renaissance. So it didn't say might have fueled or could have fueled or possibly fueled. It says that it did help fuel them. So that means that this was an effect of early printing, that the Renaissance was able to be spread through printed books and printed information. Apologies. A challenge to institutional authority. I can see challenged authority right here in the same section. While printing, and we're reading around as we do when we find a keyword, while printing spread literacy by making books more affordable, it also challenged the authority of established institutions. Okay, again, definitive language. We can see that it actually was the case and is not a probably. So it's not mitigation, and it seems like causation, that happened. A decrease in cost of book productions. We can see here the cost dramatically reducing costs, and again, we know that this is the case. Allowed these things to happen, which dramatically reduce the cost. And then, so we know that's not true, leaving us with D, but let's check it anyway. The spread of socially disruptive ideas. Now, we know that ideas in society was spread based on this. So we might have thought, oh yes, so this must be right. The spread of socially disruptive ideas like the Renaissance and like the Protestant Reformation, which disrupted the zeitgeist and the mentality and the culture of the moment. But it's not saying that quite, because take a look down here. Some feared that easy access to books would lead to the spread of heretical or socially disruptive ideas. Now, why is this shown not to be an effect, and why it is our answer? Here. Some feared that this would be the case. If in this next sentence it explained that this came true and that multiple events of socially disruptive ideas or heretical information was spread as a result of the printing press, then this would be an effect. However, there is doubt here. There is doubt here. So we cannot say for sure that this is the case. It is just a fear. So D is our answer. Some tips and tricks for you. Practice time sessions. You need to get accustomed to the timings of this exam in order to do well and to use your time most efficiently. You'll want to read the statements before reading the passage. This will help keywords stand out to you and will make your job easier in trying to find the right answer. You're looking to make educated guesses through the process of elimination, even by reducing your number of options from 4 to 3. If you know one of the options is wrong, it increases your likelihood to get it right. And if you are very much running out of time in this section, do try and focus on the wrong answers and see which ones you know are not correct, and answer every question. There's no negative marking in the verbal reasoning section, so incorrect answers do not get minus points, but blank answers get no points. So if you have run out of time or need to make a guess, that is a good thing. Make your best choice, and it will increase your probability of getting the right answer and of doing the best that you can on this section. With that as well, if you're really unsure about an answer and you think I need more than 28.6 seconds to decide this, then you can flag this question by pressing Alt and F, and you'll be able to flag that question. And then at the end of the section, it will say review flagged questions, and you'll be able to click back through only the flagged questions, thus saving yourself even more time, because you won't need to click through all of the questions you know are right, and will just allow you to focus on the few that you need to go back to. Use your time gained by true, false, can't tell questions, because they are often slightly quicker to accomplish, because you don't need to read 4 full answers and look for many more keywords. You just need to read the statement and then decide true, false, or can't tell. So if any time you gain on those question sets, use for the free text questions, because you will need as much information, as much time as possible in order to get through this section of the exam calmly and smoothly and successfully. That's the end of this video. Please reach out if you have any questions, and if you want, there are also some worked example questions, so more questions like this where you can see and talk through with me the process of thinking behind answering some of these harder verbal reasoning questions. Thanks for now, and see you in the next video. Bye.